Ted Mosby was never the romantic. Ted Mosby spent 9 seasons presenting himself as a hopeless romantic whose relentless pursuit of true love made him the emotional center of one of television's most beloved sitcoms. The show framed his longing as endearing, his grand gestures as proof of genuine feeling, and his eventual happiness as earned through years of patient, devoted searching. The theory strips that framing away and examines what Ted actually does to the people around him across 9 seasons, and the portrait underneath is considerably darker than any romantic comedy should produce. Ted love bombs every new relationship within days, overwhelming women with grand gestures and declarations that arrive before genuine connection has been established, a pattern psychologists associate with manipulation rather than authentic feeling. He proposes to Stella after knowing her for a fraction of the time the gesture implies. He continues pursuing Robin for years after she tells him directly, clearly, and repeatedly that she doesn't want what he's offering, and he frames his refusal to accept her stated position as devotion rather than what it actually is. He cheats on Victoria with Robin mid-relationship. He makes Robin surrender her dogs as a condition of their time together. And the show's entire premise, a man telling his children a years-long story about how he met their mother, reveals itself in the finale as something far more disturbing. The mother is dead, and Ted spent 9 seasons using his children as a captive audience to work up the nerve to pursue Robin again. The story was never about how he met their mother. It was about why he never stopped wanting someone else. Ross Geller controlled everyone around him. Ross Geller is coded throughout Friends as the group's most educated, most professionally accomplished, and most romantically sincere member. The show presents his feelings for Rachel as pure, his divorces as bad luck, and his occasional possessiveness as the understandable overflow of genuine emotion. The theory examines what Ross actually does to the people he claims to love and finds a sustained pattern of control that the show's laugh track consistently prevented audiences from naming correctly. He becomes romantically possessive of Rachel while she is still with Barry, and before she has any reason to consider him as a partner, projecting feelings onto their friendship that she never invited. When Rachel gets a job opportunity in Paris, Ross sabotages her departure by telling her potential employer she is no longer interested, making a permanent career decision on her behalf without her knowledge or consent. He delivers a speech about his feelings for Rachel on the night of her engagement to someone else, centering his own emotional needs at the exact moment she had committed to another person. His relationship with Emily ends not because he said Rachel's name at the altar, but because he refuses to honor his wife's reasonable request to stop spending time with Rachel afterward. The show frames Ross's behavior as romantic persistence and comedic mishap. The theory maps it as a man who treats the women in his life as extensions of his own emotional narrative, rather than people with independent agency. His 3 divorces aren't bad luck. They're the consistent outcome of one person's inability to prioritize anyone else's needs above his own. Marie Barone was running a psychological operation. Marie Barone is presented throughout Everybody Loves Raymond as the quintessential overbearing sitcom mother-in-law. Her interference coded as excessive love rather than calculated control, her cruelty toward Deborah framed as generational difference rather than deliberate campaign. The show asks the audience to find her exhausting and ultimately lovable. The theory removes the lovable framing and maps what Marie actually does to Deborah across 9 seasons with the attention it deserves. Marie enters Deborah's home without invitation, routinely, for years, on a schedule that ensures Deborah never has full sovereignty over her own domestic space. She criticizes Deborah's cooking, parenting, and housekeeping in front of her children specifically, undermining Deborah's authority in the one environment where that authority matters most. She triangulates Raymond against Deborah in nearly every significant conflict, positioning herself as the person who truly understands her son in a way designed to keep Raymond's primary loyalty permanently divided. She compares Deborah unfavorably to herself in front of company, in front of the children, in front of Raymond, in a sustained campaign so consistent across 9 seasons that it stops resembling excess love and starts resembling something with a specific strategic aim. The theory says Marie's goal was never to be part of her son's family. It was to remain the center of it. Every intrusion, every comparison, every undermining comment was a maintenance operation on a dynamic she had built across Raymond's entire childhood and refused to surrender when he married someone else. Deborah wasn't Raymond's wife to Marie. She was an obstacle Marie spent 9 seasons working around. George Costanza was the most dangerous person in the room. George Costanza is Seinfeld's most celebrated comic creation, a man whose spectacular, comprehensive failure at every dimension of adult life generated some of the most quoted comedy in television history. The show made his awfulness endearing through the specificity of his self-awareness, his ability to articulate exactly how badly he was about to behave before he did it. The theory says that self-awareness is the most dangerous thing about George, because a man who understands precisely what he is doing and continues doing it anyway has made a deliberate ethical choice, not a human mistake. George lies reflexively, and without practical necessity, to employers, to women, to friends, to anyone whose good opinion he briefly desires and immediately risks. He maintains multiple simultaneous deceptions across extended periods with a consistency that requires active maintenance rather than simple avoidance. His fiancée, Susan, dies because George's cheapness led him to purchase toxic envelopes for their wedding invitations, and his response to her death is barely concealed relief. The show resolves Susan's death with a punchline and moves forward, without requiring George to sit with what his choices actually produced. His relationship with Jerry is built on a dynamic where George provides chaos and Jerry provides the audience, a transactional arrangement the show presents as friendship, but which functions as one person using another as entertainment infrastructure. Jason Alexander has said in interviews that George's behavior gets genuinely darker the longer you examine it in sequence rather than episode by episode. The finale puts him in prison for accumulated selfishness. The theory says the sentence arrived about 8 seasons later than the behavior warranted. Lorelai Gilmore raised a dependent, not a daughter. Gilmore Girls presents Lorelai and Rory's relationship as the most aspirational mother-daughter dynamic in television history. A friendship-first bond built on mutual respect, shared humor, and the kind of closeness most families can only approximate from a distance. The show frames their enmeshment as a feature rather than a consequence of specific, documented choices Lorelai made during Rory's childhood that the series never fully holds her accountable for. The theory examines what that enmeshment actually produced in Rory by the time the show ends, and the revival confirms the damage. Lorelai fled her own controlling mother at 16, pregnant, determined to build something entirely different. What she built was a relationship so tightly bonded that Rory never developed the independent identity that adolescence is supposed to produce. Every major decision Rory makes across 7 seasons runs through Lorelai first. Her sense of humor is Lorelai's humor. Her cultural references are Lorelai's references. Her romantic patterns, the men she chooses, the way she navigates those choices, mirror Lorelai's own, with a specificity that goes beyond coincidence. The revival confirms what the series implied. Rory in her 30s is professionally unfocused, financially dependent, and still organizing her emotional life around her mother's approval. Lorelai didn't raise a daughter who could leave. She raised a permanent extension of herself and called it closeness. The show gave you their banter as evidence of love. The theory says the banter was also the mechanism of a dependency so total that Rory never found out who she was when Lorelai wasn't in the room. Jim Halpert was cruel for 9 seasons. Jim Halpert is the office's audience surrogate, the camera's trusted confidant, the normal one whose knowing looks to the lens, invited viewers to share his perspective on the dysfunction surrounding him in Dunder Mifflin's Scranton branch. The show positions him as sympathetic by default because the camera agrees with him. The theory says the camera was complicit in something the footage itself disproves. Jim's pranks on Dwight are not playful office culture. They are sustained, targeted, psychological operations conducted against a man with a documented gap in his ability to distinguish fantasy from reality, a gap Jim identified early and exploited consistently across 9 years. The fake vampire incident, the fake CIA recruitment, the fake Benjamin Franklin. Each prank is specifically engineered to probe a cognitive vulnerability that Jim knows exists and that Dwight cannot protect himself against. Beyond Dwight, Jim's treatment of Karen, his girlfriend in Season 3, reads on examination as a man maintaining a relationship he never intended to honor while running a parallel campaign to reposition Pam toward him. He doesn't choose Pam. He erodes Karen's position until Pam is the remaining option and frames the outcome as love. In the later seasons, Jim secretly commits significant household money to a startup business without telling Pam, lying by omission across months of their marriage about decisions that affected their family. The show frames this as a rough patch in an otherwise healthy relationship. The theory frames it as the most honest reveal in the series. Jim was never the good guy the camera said he was. He was simply the one holding the camera. Barney Stinson was a serial predator. How I Met Your Mother coded Barney Stinson as a lovable rogue whose elaborate schemes for attracting women were treated as comedic art. His success rate presented as proof of charisma rather than what the schemes themselves actually constitute. The Playbook, a physical manual Barney maintains and updates across multiple seasons, documents step-by-step manipulation strategies specifically designed to extract consent from women who would not otherwise provide it if they understood the actual situation. It includes impersonating authority figures. It includes creating false emotional contexts designed to make women feel they have formed genuine connections that don't exist. It includes engineering situations that exploit grief, loneliness, and specific emotional vulnerabilities. The strategies are designed to identify and target. The show treats the playbook as comedy, as evidence of Barney's creativity and commitment, as something his friends find simultaneously appalling and impressive. His eventual marriage to Robin is presented as his redemption arc, evidence that the right person can transform even the most committed bachelor into someone capable of genuine love. The theory says a redemption arc requires acknowledging the harm. Barney never acknowledges the harm. He dismantles the playbook in a grand gesture toward Robin, and the show treats the gesture as sufficient. The hundreds of women the strategies were used against don't appear in that scene. The show built 9 seasons of comedy around documented predatory behavior, made the audience root for the man executing it, and then handed him a wedding as his reward for eventually stopping. Niles Crane was obsessed, not in love. Niles Crane's 7-season infatuation with Daphne Moon is presented throughout Frasier as the show's most tender romantic storyline, proof that genuine, patient, devoted love eventually finds its way to the right person if the person carrying it is willing to wait long enough. The theory reframes the entire arc by examining what 7 years of sustained, concealed obsession actually looks like from inside a relationship, rather than from the outside as a romantic narrative. Niles spends 7 seasons maintaining a detailed fantasy about a woman employed in his father's household, a woman with no knowledge of his feelings and therefore no ability to consent to being the object of them. He inserts himself into her personal life repeatedly, using access that his family connection provides, access she would likely regulate differently if she knew the nature of his investment. He sabotages her relationships, not through direct interference the show easily condemns, but through subtle undermining, the kind that operates below the threshold of anything Daphne could identify or object to. He maintains a marriage to Morris across this entire period while carrying an emotional attachment to someone else that he has never disclosed to either woman. The theory's most uncomfortable observation is about the power dynamic the show never examines. Niles is a wealthy, credentialed professional who is obsessed with a woman employed in his father's care. That specific combination of access, concealment, and sustained emotional investment in someone who cannot consent to it because they don't know it exists is not a love story. It is a situation the show chose to make into one. Phoebe Buffay was the most calculating person in the group. Phoebe Buffay is Friends' resident eccentric, the character whose apparent disconnection from conventional reality generates comedy through her sincere, guileless engagement with whatever the situation in front of her contains. She is coded as the group's most innocent member, her oddness presented as evidence of genuine spiritual openness rather than strategic positioning. The theory assembled across Reddit threads and fan analysis sites tracks what Phoebe actually does across 10 seasons, rather than how the show frames what she does, and finds a pattern considerably less guileless than her presentation suggests. Phoebe consistently avoids every form of reciprocal obligation the other 5 characters accept as part of group membership. She doesn't help with moves. She doesn't contribute financially to shared expenses in the ways others do. She exits uncomfortable situations with spiritual language that the group accepts without challenge, because challenging it feels like attacking her sincerity. She maintains businesses and income streams the show never fully accounts for, while performing financial precariousness when it serves her. Her romantic relationships are structured to give her maximum emotional experience with minimum sustained vulnerability. And her apparent honesty, the quality the show presents as her defining characteristic, is deployed selectively in ways that consistently advantage Phoebe while the group absorbs whatever the honesty produces. The theory says Phoebe's eccentricity is not a personality. It is the most effective social armor in the show. Nobody holds the strange woman accountable. Nobody challenges her with the same directness they apply to Monica's rigidity or Ross's pretension. Phoebe built a life inside a friend group that protected her from every consequence it imposed on everyone else. Howard Wolowitz treated women as targets. Howard Wolowitz is introduced in The Big Bang Theory as the group's designated romantic failure, his lack of a PhD, his most cited professional inadequacy, and his approach to women, his most reliable source of comedic discomfort. The show uses Howard's behavior as cringe comedy, his attempts at pickup routines landing badly enough that the failure itself is the joke. The theory removes the failure framing and looks at the behavior independent of its outcome. Howard's documented approach to women across the show's early seasons constitutes a sustained pattern of harassment that the group witnesses, comments on, and continues tolerating without meaningful intervention. He uses false identities online to deceive women into conversations they wouldn't have consented to with accurate information. He physically positions himself in ways designed to generate unwanted contact. He makes comments to Penny, in front of the group, in front of Leonard, who is pursuing a relationship with her, that the show treats as Howard being Howard rather than as Leonard's supposed friend, deliberately undermining his confidence and Penny's comfort simultaneously. His eventual marriage to Bernadette is the show's evidence that Howard grew. The theory says the growth the show depicts is behavioral modification under social pressure rather than genuine ethical development. Howard stopped the behavior that was failing. He never demonstrated understanding of why the behavior was wrong, independent of its failure rate. The show gave him a wife as evidence of change. The theory says the evidence required something the character never provided. Andy Bernard was never what he performed. Andy Bernard arrives at Dunder Mifflin's Scranton branch in Season 3 as a transfer from the Stanford office. His aggressive personality management, the immediate result of anger management completion, his good-natured enthusiasm for connection and belonging presented as who he genuinely is underneath the earlier volatility. The show builds Andy across seasons as a lovable, slightly tragic figure whose need for approval and appreciation generates both comedy and genuine pathos. The theory tracks what Andy does when his performed affability is stressed beyond its capacity to hold, and finds the original Andy still fully present underneath the management. His relationship with Erin is conducted with a romantic certainty that ignores her stated position whenever her stated position inconveniences his preferred narrative. His response to being passed over for management is extended, consuming resentment that he redirects toward coworkers rather than processing. His final seasons, in which he pursues internet fame through a platform called Here Comes Treble while his employees manage without him, document a man who abandons every professional and personal responsibility the moment personal ambition provides an exit. He does not manage the Scranton branch. He performs managing it in front of the people he manages while actually managing his own image. The show frames his final departure and YouTube fame as both sad and slightly triumphant. The theory says what the show actually depicted was a man who used a performance of warmth and belonging to extract loyalty from people he was never actually invested in, for as long as their loyalty was useful to him, and left the moment something more interesting came along. Frank Reynolds built the gang's destruction. Frank Reynolds is the oldest member of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia's central group, the one whose presence requires the most narrative justification, and whose connection to the others is the most circumstantially assembled. He arrives in Season 2, claiming to be Charlie's biological father, immediately embeds himself in the group's daily operations, and begins providing the financial infrastructure that converts the gang from a struggling bar's incompetent owners into something considerably more dangerous and more sustained in their capacity for destruction. The theory's central argument is this: the gang's schemes, criminal activities, and escalating catastrophes all have a ceiling determined by what they can actually afford to pursue. Without Frank's money, the ceiling is low. The schemes collapse at the planning stage for lack of resources. The criminal acts they commit don't scale past the level of petty, self-limiting disasters that natural consequence brings to an end. Frank arrived and removed that ceiling. He funded the chaos. He absorbed the legal exposure. He provided the financial insulation that made consequence manageable rather than catastrophic, across 17 seasons of documented harm to the people of Philadelphia. The theory says Frank Reynolds is not a character who became degenerate by associating with the gang. He is the economic infrastructure that converted their individual degeneracy into something systematic and sustained. Cricket's physical destruction, the bar's sustained criminal operation, the increasingly serious harm the gang generates across every season, all of it required capital. Frank provided the capital without ever being seriously held responsible for what the capital enabled. He is the show's most quietly effective villain because he never had to do anything himself. Sheldon Cooper chose every single behavior. The Big Bang Theory's most sustained argument is that Sheldon Cooper's behavior is the product of how he is wired, that his social limitations are neurological rather than chosen, and that the people around him who tolerate his behavior are demonstrating love rather than enabling something that should have been confronted years earlier. The theory challenges the neurological framing directly by pointing to a specific and consistent pattern within the show itself. Sheldon's behavior toward people he considers useful is different from his behavior toward people he does not. He modulates. He adjusts. He produces social performance when the audience matters enough to produce it for. This modulation, documented across multiple seasons in his treatment of academic authorities versus his treatment of his friends, is not the behavior of someone who cannot calibrate social response. It is the behavior of someone who has decided that certain relationships don't require the performance. His roommate agreement is not a quirky organizational tool. It is a legal document, specifically designed to convert a reciprocal human relationship into a set of enforceable obligations that run primarily in Sheldon's favor. His treatment of Amy across their relationship, placing her between himself and physical danger in one documented scene, using her emotional investment as a management tool across multiple seasons, maps against the show's own psychiatric assessment of him. In Season 10, the show has another character explicitly state that Sheldon is a sociopath. Delivering it as a joke, the laugh track confirms you should find funny. The theory says the laugh track was doing a lot of work in that moment. Sheldon Cooper didn't lack social understanding. He lacked the motivation to apply it to people he didn't need anything from.